Up next, we have our title sponsor presentation by Peter Knez, Chairman and CEO of Teal Nature, and the topic is the Great Emergence. So let's give a big round of applause. Love, appreciation. Gentlemen, come on up. Good to see you. It's been a while. Good to see you. Good.
Does this work? Perfect. Well, it's almost impossible to meet the level of enthusiasm that Gordon Einstein brings to the stage, but we will do our level best. My name is Chris Keshian. I'm founder and CIO of Triton Liquid, an Abu Dhabi-based liquid asset fund, and I have the honor today to be joined by Peter Knez, a close friend and a mentor of mine for some time. Peter, if you want to just make a quick introduction.
Thanks everybody and Hadi, thank you, and the Congressional Congress, thank you all for the opportunity to speak. My background has been in financial services for, I hate to think about how long, but 30, 40 years. Most recently, I've been involved with, I'm chairman of a platform called Palm Global Technologies, and I'm CEO of a platform called Palm Promax Investments. Out of Abu Dhabi, and I'm chairman and CEO of a platform called Teal.
So Peter, as you just mentioned, you've spent decades in the financial services industry, and at some of the most important institutions in the space. My first question for you is, how do you see the current digital transformation taking place?
Well, for me, I think it's useful to think about the current digital transformation and put it in context of the broader set of transformations that are happening across multiple verticals, not the least of which is geopolitically, there's the transformation. I think it's the end of the Cold War era. And so in that context, you're seeing transformations of major institutions like the UN, like currency regimes, et cetera. But what I find useful from the point of view of blockchain, AI, and tokenization is to think of it as an access technology, in the sense that with AI, you can access any content, anywhere, in any format, and create almost any content. And so at the end of the day, it's really a content delivery mechanism. Second, I think with respect to blockchain and tokenization, it's really digital representation of anything in this room, and putting that in the context of decentralization. So when you put AI together with sort of this, it's enabling the kind of access it's enabling, and you put that in the context of tokenization and decentralization, you're really talking about the entire transformation of the infrastructure of financial services. And the means by which people exchange things. So it's the most, in my view, it's the most comprehensive transformation of financial services in my lifetime.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And so a natural corollary to that question, I think, is how does this broader context impact financial services?
Well, I think from my perspective, I think you heard a lot of people earlier around the regulation in that context. From my experience and where I've spent most of my career, I really approach it from an asset management point of view. And in that context, you're really seeing the emergence of new asset classes, which, if you think about, say, tokenization, at the end of the day, most of the assets in the world are privately held. They dwarf the publicly traded assets. And the trouble with those assets is they're inaccessible. What tokenization does is it provides access. Access is a necessary condition for liquidity, and liquidity is a necessary condition for valuation. So what you're seeing in the context of AI and tokenization is you're seeing the emergence of asset classes that never existed before.
Yeah, so just to drill into that a bit more, within financial services, what do you see as the major threads or themes that are evolving currently?
Again, I take an asset management perspective. There's lots of different ways to approach the transformation, but from an asset management point of view, number one, it's really real-world assets, the emergence of real-world assets as an asset class, and providing liquidity and access that never existed before. Second, it's stablecoins. I think you're seeing the emergence of essentially multi-country, sovereign-supported, gold-backed stablecoins, which will transform, and create digital settlement layers that never existed before, particularly in the global south. I think it's obviously it's a settlement layer. Instead of things taking 3 or 4 days, they'll take 3 or 4 seconds to settle. That's profound. And then lastly, the things that I'm certainly very involved in with respect to Teal is, for the first time, you're going to be able to tokenize and datafy nature-based assets, natural ecological systems. The obvious one now is carbon credits, but there's biodiversity, there's water rights, et cetera. So the last one is the emergence of nature-based assets as an asset class as well.
Absolutely, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So, Peter, just to double click on this, you mentioned real-world assets. Maybe for those unfamiliar with the term, if you could just define it and speak to what you see as the most important aspects of real-world assets.
Well, I think the most important aspects of real-world assets really is providing the democratization of access to what was excluded to essentially the wealthy through private equity companies or VC companies. So that's why I like to think about it from an access point of view. So the real assets, you're seeing the emergence of a new asset class, and that through tokenization and fractionalization, you're seeing people to be able to access these very valuable assets that never could access it before. And in addition, since they're going to be, you're taking assets that are off-chain in the real-world asset sense and putting them on-chain, right? And so from a digital representation, so for the first time, you're going to see much more transparency, immutable track record, and auditability. So actually, when we get there, the regulatory frameworks are going to be much more efficient.
Absolutely, and one thing I love that you have said to me previously is, this level of transparency allows you to track raw materials from the ground to the government to the people, which I thought is a perfect way to distill that message. So moving on to Palm Global and Palm Promax, you are chairman of Palm Global and CEO of Palm Promax Investments. Recently, you've made several announcements regarding the tokenization of $1.5 trillion worth of real-world assets. Can you describe the assets and the goal of the tokenization project writ large?
Yeah, sure. So let me put Palm Promax Investments in context. That was a JV born out of an agreement between Palm Promax United of Abu Dhabi and Palm Global Technologies to really launch a next-generation digital financial services company. So Palm Promax United is in the possession of a lot of very valuable assets. They're intrinsically very valuable. In conversations with Palm, we felt like those assets are also strategically very valuable in the sense that you could launch a next-generation financial services company in Abu Dhabi. And for a lot of the reasons we just heard in the previous session around it's the right regulatory framework, it's geopolitically well located, it's the new Switzerland, it has a mature and maturing regulatory framework. So the idea for Palm Promax Investments was to take these very valuable intrinsic assets and then use them strategically to create a next-generation financial services platform right in Abu Dhabi and bring liquidity and access to a lot of assets. So the other thing I just would mention is I think the challenge with crypto in general right now, and from my perspective, again, as an asset manager, is the investment opportunity set is pretty limited, right? So you at Triton are investing in 20 or 30 speculative coins. So that's a very challenging investment opportunity set and very limited in terms of its ability to transform financial services. What the transformation really needs is it really needs, AA or high-rated securities that are cash flow generating, that are tokenized, so that the vast majority of investors in the world can actually invest in them. That's not to say that you can't make a lot of money doing it. Obviously you're doing very well. So it can be a good way to revenue opportunity, but it's just not going to transform financial services or asset management.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, just to build on that quickly, I tell investors, I've been in this space for 12 years. I run a hedge fund. I tell investors about 95% of the assets in this space are worthless, right? But that 5% that do hold value, they comprise about 40% of the market cap, right? But when you introduce real-world assets to this realm of digital financial composability, you unlock huge potential. So circling back to real-world assets, Peter, obviously this is very near and dear to your heart. Where do you see this going over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I really see the emergence of a proper asset class where real-world assets are properly regulated from a digital format. I mean, at the end of the day, right, financial securities are just packaged up data that trades in a regulatory framework. And so what tokenization does and blockchain does is it allows you to datafy these real-world assets through digital representation and then be able to track them. So as the regulatory framework matures and tokenization, you see it accelerating right now. Real-world assets is, after AI is probably the hottest topic in financial services, right? So I think in 3 to 5 years, you'll see a proper asset class that's invested in by the vast majority of global investors, and you'll see digitally represented AA or higher securities.
Absolutely. And so you gave a little teaser to this earlier, but to circle back, in a speech you recently discussed sovereign support of a gold-backed stablecoin. How do you see this stablecoin developing over the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, I really see, and certainly at Palm Promex Investments, we're very involved in gold-backed, sovereign-supported stablecoins. If you think about the Global South versus the Global North, the Global North sort of said to the Global South, give us your gold and here's some paper. And I think that's over. I think, I'm very, very bullish the Global South, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Africa, because I think this technology, blockchain, tokenization, et cetera, is going to really allow the emergence of a digital, multi-country, sovereign-supported stablecoins that effectively act as a digital currency. And you'll see, in my view, in the Global South in particular, you're going to see the emergence of a digital settlement layer, global digital settlement layer, particularly for trading commodities in the Global South, that will transform and sort of be an alternative to the dollar.
Absolutely. So you mentioned nature-based assets, NBAs for those in the know, not the sports franchise. Maybe if you could define this for the audience and describe how you see that fitting into the transformation of asset management and why it's important moving forward.
Well, so in some sense, the way I think about nature-based assets is it's sort of a third form of capital, right? So in this room, there's human capital, there's infrastructure capital, produced capital, if you will, there's financial capital, but there's also actually natural capital. So essentially, an ecological ecosystem's goods and services, whether that's the carbon sequestration, it's biodiversity, it's water sequestration, all those are also goods and services. They're just generated by a natural ecosystem. And so, again, because of the power of the digital representation and the power of decentralization via blockchain, you can start to digitally represent the services generated by an ecosystem. And in my view, you know, in Teal's view, this is another new emergence of an asset class enabled by this technology. And our view is, in order to basically move the planet to a sustainable place, you got to start by valuing it. By valuing it, you got to datafy and productize its assets. And so this technology, I think, is one of the most important applications is going to be, you're going to actually value nature in a way you never did.
Absolutely, in a fully transparent format that allows you to track provenance from the ground all the way to delivery. So you mentioned Teal. I know you're the chairman of Teal. Maybe comment quickly on that, and just to build on nature-based assets, what's required to create a proper asset class out of MBAs?
Sure. So just briefly, Teal was sort of born out of a frustration of trying to go from the datafication of an ecosystem. What's most well known is a carbon credit, for example, and go from the datafication or quantification of that carbon credit to its actual productization, i.e. like its tokenization, and then its actual distribution. So what we did at Teal is we integrated all those functionalities into one platform. So you can go from essentially operating at what we call the ecological edge, where ecosystem data is actually generated, and using drones and satellites and on-the-ground sensors to actually datafy that ecosystem, ecological ecosystem, and then via tokenization be able to tokenize it and tokenize that data and then distribute it as a financial product.
So just as a closing question, I think you've touched on this throughout the discussion, but why is tokenization and blockchain so important in this movement that we've referenced here today?
Well, I think for the first time that there's a technology that really allows you to very efficiently represent and track anything. And so it really limits a lot of the frictions or manipulation in any supply chain, really. And so, you know, and you're seeing like the democratization of knowledge through AI, you're seeing the democratization of access to assets through blockchain and tokenization. And the reason that Palm Promax Investments and Teal as well is so focused on the global south is this is the chance, I think, for the emergence of an continent like Africa, where they can use these technologies, they can create a stable coin, you know, hedge their exposure to the US dollar, for example. They can have more transparency, as you mentioned, from actually what's happening on the ground to what's going, the path all the way to the government, right? And so it's really, I mean, I can't say it enough that I think it's the most exciting time in financial services ever.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today, and really appreciate the words of wisdom.
Thank you.